The biggest myth is that piracy meant total freedom. No kings, no masters, no laws, just pure anarchy on the water. This is completely false. In reality, a pirate ship was one of the most rigidly structured democracies in the 18th century. They weren't escaping rules, they were just writing new ones. They were called the Pirate Code, or Articles of Agreement, and every single man on board had to sign them, often in his own blood. These weren't friendly suggestions, they were ironclad laws. No fighting on the ship, lights out by 8 p.m. Desertion in battle? That was death. Cheating your crewmates out of even $1 of loot? Death. But the most famous punishment was maroning. If you broke the code, your crewmates would row you to a desolate sandbar, give you a single pistol with one bullet, a jug of water, and sail away. It wasn't a warning. It was a slow, agonizing death sentence, either by starvation, sunstroke, or that one bullet. So, freedom? No. It was a brutal contract, and the penalty for breaking it was far worse than in any Royal Navy. Okay, so the life was harsh, but the reward was worth it, right? The treasure, chests overflowing with Spanish gold and jewels. This is perhaps the biggest exaggeration of all. Think about it. What were most ships in the 1710s actually transporting across the Atlantic? Not gold. They were carrying flour, sugar, bolts of cloth, barrels of wine, raw tobacco, and rope. When a pirate crew captured a merchant ship, they weren't shouting about doubloons. They were excited because they just scored some new sails and maybe enough food to keep from starving for another month. The legendary hauls, the great prizes, were lottery wins. They happened, but they were so rare they became instant legends, which is the only reason we hear about them today.
Deep, lads.
Even when they did score something, the loot was divided based on the ship's articles. The captain and quartermaster usually got 2 shares. A skilled surgeon or carpenter got 1.5. The average pirate got 1 single share. After a dangerous 2-month patrol, a pirate's treasure was often just a few pounds, enough to get blindingly drunk in Nassau for a week, and then he was broke. It wasn't a career for getting rich. It was a career for living 1 week at a time. So if they weren't free and they weren't rich, surely they at least had a long, merry life? This is the one that gets me. The idea of the old, grizzled pirate with a gray beard telling stories of his youth. Here's a horrifying fact. The average pirate career lasted 1 to 2 years. Most pirates never made it to their 30th birthday. And the #1 killer wasn't the Royal Navy. It wasn't a sword fight. It wasn't even a cannonball. It was disease, scurvy, a hideous vitamin deficiency that made your teeth fall out, your old wounds reopen, and your gums rot. It was typhus and yellow fever, spread by the very mosquitoes in those tropical paradises they loved. It was gangrene. Think about a minor injury today, a deep cut, or a broken bone. On a pirate ship, that was a death sentence. There were no antibiotics. The surgeon was usually just the ship's cook, whose only tool was a bottle of rum and a saw. A simple infection meant amputation. An amputation on a filthy, rocking ship usually meant death by septic shock. These men weren't singing. They were suffering, in constant pain, and dying in agony far from home. But what about the action? The epic ship-to-ship battles? The swashbuckling duels? Here's the secret. Pirates hated fighting. Fighting was bad for business. Why? Because a battle damages both ships. It breaks masts, tears sails, and wastes precious gunpowder. Worst of all, it might sink the very ship you're trying to steal. A pirate's goal was not to fight the merchant ship. It was to terrify it into surrendering without firing a single shot. That's how 99% of pirate victories were won. Not with a sword, but with a good marketing campaign. So we have to ask the big question. If piracy wasn't freedom, and it didn't make you rich, and it was a short, painful life of disease and terror, why did 90% of them do it? The answer is the most tragic part of all. They didn't become pirates because they wanted to. They became pirates to escape something far worse. The life of a merchant sailor, or worse, a Royal Navy seaman, was arguably the most brutal existence in the world. You could be impressed, kidnapped off the street and forced into service. You'd be paid almost nothing, starved, and beaten by officers for the smallest infraction. Piracy wasn't a good career choice. It was a desperate, final act of rebellion. It was a choice to live for 1 year as a free man, with a vote and a share, rather than 20 years as a slave. The Golden Age wasn't golden. It was a brief 20-year flash of desperate men who knew they were going to fail, but chose to fail on their own terms. But there was one man who did get rich, who did survive, and who did it by becoming something else entirely. But that is a story for next time.